In the early hours of the morning, while much of eastern Australia was still asleep, the rain continued falling without mercy. For days, powerful storm systems had been moving across the region, dumping enormous amounts of water onto already saturated ground. But sometime before dawn, the situation began to unravel. Rivers burst through their banks, roads disappeared beneath fast-moving floodwater, entire neighbourhoods were cut off from the outside world, and families woke to find water rushing through their homes with terrifying speed. Residents described hearing the sound of crashing debris and emergency sirens echoing through the darkness as floodwater surged into streets and communities. Some escaped carrying children through rising water. Others climbed onto rooftops and balconies as the floods continued rising around them. This is the flood disaster unfolding across Australia, one of the most dangerous flooding emergencies the country has faced in recent months. For several days before the disaster, relentless rainfall had battered large parts of eastern Australia. Meteorologists warned that powerful storm systems were developing across Queensland, New South Wales, and surrounding regions. But few expected the situation to escalate this quickly. Hour after hour, rain hammered rooftops, highways, farmland and river systems, already under pressure from previous storms. Drainage networks became overwhelmed. Rivers rose steadily throughout the night. Then, sometime before dawn, floodwaters began spilling into nearby communities. Residents described waking to the sound of water smashing against doors and walls. Some watched helplessly as floodwater poured into their homes within minutes. Others rushed to move vehicles and belongings to higher ground before roads disappeared beneath the rising water. Witnesses described seeing entire streets transformed into rivers. Cars floated through intersections. Power poles leaned dangerously as flood currents eroded the ground beneath them. In some communities, emergency alerts sounded throughout the night, warning residents to evacuate immediately. But for many families, there was little time to react. The water rose too quickly. Some escaped through windows. Others climbed onto roofs and waited in darkness for rescue crews to arrive. By sunrise, the scale of the disaster was becoming impossible to ignore. Entire communities were underwater. As daylight broke across eastern Australia, emergency responders rushed toward the worst affected areas. But reaching stranded residents quickly became a disaster in itself. Major roads were submerged, bridges became impassable. Floodwater cut off entire towns from surrounding regions. In some locations, rescue boats became the only way to move through communities. Aerial footage revealed an astonishing scene. Fields had become inland lakes. Residential neighbourhoods sat beneath muddy floodwater. Vehicles were scattered across roads and drainage channels like abandoned debris. Some homes were completely surrounded by water. Others had already been destroyed by the force of the floods. Witnesses described watching sheds, fences, and entire sections of buildings break apart and disappear downstream. In low-lying areas, floodwater continued rising long after the rain had eased. Families gathered on rooftops waving for help. Some residents used kayaks and small boats to rescue neighbours trapped inside flooded homes. Others formed volunteer rescue groups, moving door to door, searching for anyone unable to evacuate. Hospitals across affected regions began preparing for a surge in emergency cases. Medical teams treated injuries ranging from cuts and fractures to exposure-related illnesses after residents spent hours trapped in cold floodwater. Meanwhile, emergency shelters began filling with displaced families carrying whatever belongings they managed to save. For many, everything else had been left behind. As conditions worsened, large-scale rescue operations were launched across the flood zone. Emergency services, military personnel, police units, firefighters and volunteers were deployed to assist stranded residents. Rescue helicopters filled the skies above flooded communities. Searchlights scanned rooftops and isolated homes looking for people trapped by rising water. Inflatable rescue boats moved through submerged streets carrying families to evacuation centres on higher ground. But conditions remained extremely dangerous. Fast-moving currents made navigation difficult. Floating debris created constant hazards. And in some areas, floodwater concealed damaged roads, open drains, and collapsed infrastructure beneath the surface. Rescue crews worked around the clock. Some teams reportedly carried elderly residents to safety through waist-deep floodwater. Others rescued pets and livestock stranded by the rising water. Families gathered near evacuation centres waiting for news about missing relatives. Some sat silently watching helicopters pass overhead. Others desperately refreshed their phones, hoping to receive messages from loved ones trapped in isolated communities. Communication failures complicated rescue efforts even further. Power outages affected thousands of homes, cell towers were damaged or lost service. Emergency coordination increasingly relied on radio systems and satellite communication. Despite the challenges, rescuers continued pulling survivors from flooded homes, stranded vehicles, and isolated rooftops. But as the hours passed, concerns continued growing. The floodwaters were still spreading. So what caused the flooding to become this dangerous? Experts say several factors combined to create the perfect conditions for disaster. The first was extreme rainfall. Days of persistent storms delivered enormous amounts of rain across already saturated catchments and river systems. Once the ground could absorb no more water, runoff increased dramatically. Rivers began rising at alarming speeds. Floodplains quickly filled beyond capacity. But weather alone may not explain the scale of the destruction. Urban expansion has increased flood risks in many areas by placing more homes and infrastructure inside flood-prone zones. Roads, buildings, and paved surfaces prevent rainwater from draining naturally into the ground. Instead, water accumulates rapidly during major storm events. Environmental experts also point to changing climate patterns. Warmer ocean temperatures can fuel stronger storm systems, capable of producing more intense rainfall over shorter periods of time. Across Australia, extreme weather events have become increasingly frequent in recent years. Floods, bushfires, cyclones, heat waves, each bringing new challenges to communities already facing growing environmental risks. And experts warn that severe flooding events like this may become more common in the future. Authorities say thousands of residents have now been displaced by the floods. Schools, sports centres, community halls, and government buildings have been transformed into emergency shelters. Families sleep on temporary beds surrounded by donated supplies. Children sit beside piles of wet clothing and salvaged belongings. Many survivors escaped with only minutes to spare. No time to pack, no time to save valuables, only enough time to get out. Health officials are now warning about additional dangers emerging after the floodwaters. Contaminated water supplies raise the risk of disease. Damaged infrastructure threatens access to essential services. And as floodwaters slowly begin to recede in some areas, another challenge emerges: the cleanup. Mud-filled homes, destroyed businesses, damaged roads, ruined crops, and billions of dollars in potential losses. For many communities, recovery could take months. For some families, it could take years. And tonight, many remain uncertain about what their future will look like. Tonight, parts of Australia remain underwater. Entire communities have been cut off by floodwater. Families continue waiting for news about missing loved ones, and rescue crews remain on the front lines, working through dangerous conditions to save lives. What began as days of heavy rainfall quickly transformed into one of the country's most significant flood emergencies in recent months. But beyond the destruction itself, the disaster serves as another reminder of how quickly extreme weather can change lives. One moment, communities were carrying on as normal. The next, they were fighting rising water in the middle of the night. For now, the people of Australia wait in resilience and uncertainty as floodwaters continue to reshape the landscape around them. The rain may ease, the rivers may eventually fall, but the impact of this disaster will be felt long after the waters recede. This story is still developing, and tonight thousands remain hoping for safer days ahead.